Good evening, everyone. My name is Namibian, and I do not represent any organization. I'm just regular Namibian youth. I wanted to know, given the influx of funds about to be poured into our country with oil and green hydrogen industries, is there a way we can use these funds to somewhat pay for the government debt that we have? Is there a way to pour that into that? And also, how are we going to deal with inflation at a grassroots level, considering the large amounts that are about to be put into the country? And that is what I have.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Robert. My name is Continue. I'm also an economist, but independent. There are two key issues, particularly in the green hydrogen space. I saw that they launched an implementation authority in the Ministry of Environment. I'm surprised I mentioned it there, but it's there. As well as green hydrogen also announced the social economic framework about a month ago, the rollout of how the local content, how it's going to be. So I think that one is the immediate investment plan for the country. The oil and gas, that will come probably after a decade or so when drilling production starts. So with that rate of investment that's coming into the country, you see companies popping up. Some have not even been announced in the media, but thank you for sharing it with us. We see it now. So I think everybody can expect a huge inflow of international investment. And I think where government can capitalize on this is whereby they actually register these companies. They know, they identify what skills are needed by these companies. Because at this point, the foreign investors come and they just do catch fishing on their own. You know, they need to have a public body that can actually assist them in terms of where can we match local skills with the investment that's coming in. Otherwise, we might have a lost opportunity in terms of capitalizing on this investment. Thank you.
Okay. My name is Harald. I work with renewable energy and green hydrogen. I would like you to provide us with the data comparing the economic growth in Namibia and the rising indebtedness. Two curves. To answer my question whether or not, it is true that the economic growth is actually not real economic growth, but it is just covered by increasing debt. And maybe if you can include the inflation rate, then I think we would have a better picture. That is point one. The other one is, with your permission, I will just contribute an information that we are almost asking for. The price for the 24% is 360 Namibian dollars. It was 360. Between hyphen and the Namibian government. Then
360 million.
No, 360 words. 360 finishing card. But now comes the next point. Afterwards comes a feasibility study which is budgeted to cost 930 million euros. And the Namibian part of that would be 24%, which is roughly, if you are generous with the exchange rate, 1.8 billion Namibian dollars. So this is what was said yesterday in the information meeting. And for the general interest, I'm not working for HIFIN, but HIFIN is doing an information campaign, and they're having, I don't have it by heart, but I think it's in the next 3 or 5 days, people can go and listen to them. I have that from one of them.
So I think great questions. Oil and debt. I think the issue there is, we're indebted, more revenues will come. We can use that revenue to pay down debt, if that's what we decide, or it will allow us to borrow more. The whole range of issues there. It will give us more options, but as I try to emphasize, it's the quality of that spending that's important. To get that right, we need more than just our gut instincts, we need some analysis and things. The other thing is inflation, and I think you've put your finger on it actually, because this is quite a small economy, and you can imagine this big monster coming in and just sort of moving all over the place, with all the billions sloshing around and everything, highly skilled people getting paid a lot of money, going out to restaurants, afterwards going down the shops and buying things and things. It could be a huge boom. And the thing with booms is that they're not necessarily sustainable, and they can have adverse impacts on especially people who aren't part of that setup. And that's really my concern, that we must do what we can to avoid an oil dependency in the economy where a few people in the oil sector are doing very well and everyone else is excluded. And that is a central challenge. That is a huge challenge, I think. And I'm not sure how we deal with that. And certainly there are sort of monetary policy aspects of that. How do we, fundamentally, do we remain pegged to the South African rand or not? If not, do we peg to something else? Do we free float? There's big currency questions there. And then how do we use monetary policy to tackle this issue of inflation? I think that's a very big challenge. All the money flowing to Windhoek or Walvis Bay, what happens to the rest of the country? You've put your finger on the right question, and I think we need to give a lot of thought to that, to be honest. So I think we need to start doing some research on these sorts of issues if we haven't already. So that's my response to you. The gentleman at the back, again, very good questions. Yes, socio-economic policy. Okay, let me put my cards on the table. I'm a big supporter of green hydrogen. I think it's a genuine opportunity for this country to diversify its exports, to get into a new industry, get into new global markets. So in that sense, it is very, very exciting. And you might already know I had some involvement in the industry for the first 6 months of this year, because I believe it is an opportunity. But I think you always have to be careful about overhyping things, especially something new. And my only concern is that we might be overhyping the green hydrogen opportunity, certainly in the coming few years. This is going to be something very big, but I think it's going to take longer, and the benefits are going to take longer to come through. Now, whether we can start getting into things like manufacturing wind turbines or electrolyzers or all these things, I'm not saying it's not possible, but I haven't seen much evidence that serious work is being done on this at the moment. So yet again, there will be some Namibian suppliers and some spillovers and construction work and stuff. But I don't see what you're doing to really get into the meat of things. That really is a serious undertaking. If we're building electrolyzers, there is a global shortage of electrolyzers. This is highly sophisticated equipment built by top manufacturers globally. That's ambitious. I'm not saying we shouldn't be ambitious, but if we want to really capture a lot of the value in this industry, and that's possibly the sort of thing we should be thinking about, but then we have to orientate all sorts of things to achieve that. Registering companies, yes. I mean, I've presented you with a list of the companies that I think are active in the green hydrogen space. But I go on the green hydrogen, the government's green hydrogen website, I don't see much information out there about all these projects. That's why I'll be keeping a very close watch on them all, and talking to people and finding out about them and tracking progress. So I just think it's good that we all keep an eye on these things. I wish the newspapers would cover it in more detail. I don't quite know about registration. I mean, there must be obligations on all these companies to register. But I think a bit more information out there would be very welcome. Especially as this is going to be, the nature of the industry is that it takes up an awful lot of land, for example. So you can't just do it in your backyard. This is big scale stuff. Okay, the final questions are growth versus debt. Yes, is it real growth? I mean, we can have a debate about what is real growth. But certainly, what strikes me is that since sort of 2016, we've sort of borrowed a lot, saying that borrowing to invest in infrastructure and things is a good thing and will lead to growth, but that hasn't been the case. And that's actually quite common in many countries. If you borrow a lot and you spend it on the wrong things, then you run into trouble. So I think what we've seen is borrowing is up, growth is down. Quite clearly, what have we done with the money that we borrowed? What have we got to show for the Eurobonds that we've sold to the markets? What have we got to show for that borrowing? I just don't see it. If we're borrowing and then we're spending it on, for want of a better example, Nectar land, which isn't really economically productive, then it doesn't surprise me that we don't see real growth coming out the other end. So that, again, for me, comes back to the fact that we're not putting enough economic thinking into our spending decisions. You know, we do things for political reasons. Yes, we need something in the south. But we need to base it on some hard-nosed economic assessments. And I'd like to see that applied to the whole government capital expenditure program. So I completely agree. I mean, growth down, borrowing up. I mean, that's where we are. It's almost contradictory, isn't it? The hyphen information, well, great, and I should really participate in these sessions. Yeah, great. You know, I think it is an issue. A lot of people talk to me about whether government should or shouldn't buy into hyphen. I'm a little bit agnostic on that, as I think I said last year. On the one hand, I don't want to like governments borrowing lots of money and spending it on risky things, because governments aren't in a good position to withstand that risk. It's essentially taxpayers' money, and the taxpayers really want to see their money put into something risky. I'm not sure. On the other hand, this thing is so big, it's going to be such a big part of the economy, it's going to be very hard to just allow a private sector operator to sort of do everything on their own. You can regulate it, but you know, if you're a shareholder, you're on the inside track, you know what's going on. The trouble with that is that if you're always trying to own and regulate at the same time, you always end up in this conflict of interest. You're the referee and the player at the same time. So when it comes to imposing hard decisions on private sector players, you can't, because you're actually one of the players. And that's my concern. So I think on balance, I'd probably stay out of this. This is a new industry, it's high risk. I don't know what the conditions of the lending from the Europeans are for the government. Maybe they're very you know, attractive. But I would say stay out of new industries as government and do your best to regulate and encourage private sector actors to take the risks, lose the money if they have to, then you're off the hook. That's the general guide. I'm happy to be convinced the other way.
The figures for
The debt.
how much it costs service the debt?
Yeah, well, a lot. Probably. Do you have that? I mean, it's, I don't know how much of the budget, how much of the expenditure we're paying now. 14% of revenues, yes. It's 14% of all our revenues, yeah. So it's probably one of the top, you know, after education, health, defence. It's probably number 4 in terms of what we spend on tax money.
My name is Robert McGregor, I'm an economist at Cirrus. My question is just, I mean, given sort of your summary at the end there, so the prospects around sort of general recovery, a bit of easing on the monetary and fiscal side, the investments around green hydrogen and oil and gas and some of the prospects there, tempered with the policy issues. Do you think that the growth outlook of a moderate 3% is realistic, too high, too low?
But I want to pose a challenge to you and to all of us. That is that if we superimpose the data from the Afrobarometer and other surveys, we look at social Namibia, we look at the political context in our society, we look at where the economy fits into that equation, this country is in deep trouble. And this is a matter of grave concern. Because the problem, quite frankly, is there is, at the political level, there is a deep erosion in trust of politics more generally, and of politicians particularly, and of certain parties and institutions. There's a decline in erosion of public trust in the way government operates, the way we need to deliver services, and so on. Secondly, there's this very naive belief in techno-nationalism. In other words, go to the big boys, get the guys with the big money and the technology, and somehow you will rescue the society. While at the level of politics, we see the politicization of ethnicity, we see the fragmentation of Namibian society. We see more polarization, less cohesion socially than we've seen since independence. So, you know, these are the contradictions. And then you have the language, the narrative of government. You know, the narrative of government needs to be deconstructed. It's not doing what it says it's meant to do. We do not have pro-poor budgeting. We do not have it. We do not have a framework that is robust enough to deal with the social support nets that are needed to look after our population. But ultimately, morally, that is the principal responsibility of government. Not economic growth, not investment, but to protect the people and to look after the people. That's morally the fundamental responsibility of all governments. So I'm very concerned. I'm deeply concerned. I hear you and what you say. I think generally I respect, although I would disagree here and there, obviously. But I think what we need to do is we need to integrate this analysis with where are we as a society. That ought to happen. And it would be good for IPPR and others, not because I'm a trustee, to initiate this dialogue. We need a national dialogue urgently in Namibia. This country is falling apart, we are drifting. And it's not only corruption, it's not only individuals. We've lost social cohesion. We've lost the moral compass. We don't have it. We have no moral leadership left in Namibia. We have tenderpreneurs. We have hyenas, scavengers. We have scavengers. That's the kind of economy we've created. So, I you know, what you say, I take and I value and I appreciate. But there's much more to the story. There's much more to it. And next year you will see what might happen at the political and social level. There are levels of desperation and poverty and inequality that are really frightening. There's youth unemployment. It's not for nothing that the EU is even warned, and the UN agencies have even warned that this might lead to a social revolution. So we need to get our house in order, all of us, each and every one of us. Our health system is in crisis, our education system is in crisis, and so on and so forth. So those are the issues that I think we also need to factor into this equation. And then I think, you know, we need to really ask the hard questions and bite the bullets that are tough to bite.
Thank you very much. My name is Donald Kaiser. I am a reporter in the NBC newsroom and a producer for business and economic news on NBC. So I have two questions specifically. I wanted to ask with regards to your analysis, in comparison to your analysis and Minister Tom Aweto's analysis on the decline of investment rates. So in your analysis, you say that investment has declined, and in the minister's analysis, it's also spoken at also given at the World Conference. He stated, and even going as far as praising the president on the amount of significant investment that happened in Namibia. How is your analysis different from that was given by Minister Awendo? Secondly, I want to ask about the effectiveness of rating agencies. Specifically, when we look at credit rating agencies and also agencies such as the Mo Ibrahim, Fraser's, Fitch, and so on. How does these agencies, or do you think these agencies to a certain extent can and are used against African countries to make decisions in what would interest the Western world? For example, would Namibia get a bad credit rating or bad rating in terms of the Mo Ibrahim Index or the World Economic Forum Index as well, if it does end up deciding to join BRICS? And on that note, I also want your opinion on what you think on Namibia joining BRICS. Thank you.
And I have to say, over the cycle of COVID, I was quite impressed that our Ministry of Finance got things pretty much right. I mean, you know, you're never going to get things 100% right, especially in an economy where, you know, a few things can really move the dial. So I think it was quite sober, conservative, responsible, and I give credit to the Ministry of Finance for doing that. So I tend to believe their numbers now. So I think that, they might not be exactly right. I haven't made my own forecast, to be perfectly honest. But if it ends up, I think the main thing is it errs on the conservative, and I think that's probably a good thing about it. So that's that one. Professor Dupasani, I mean, you have incredibly deep knowledge on all these issues, political, social, and economic. I don't want to agree or disagree with what you said. I'm trying here to present data, official data, not my own opinions and not my own manifesto. So if we can all start on the same basis, and just pointing out we haven't got much data on the social side of things for a long time because we haven't been measuring it. And I'm asking, why are we not measuring these important things? So I'm not drawing a conclusion necessarily, but I am someone who believes that at the end of the day, competition is good in the economy. It's generally a force for good, and competition is also a force for good in the field of politics. And until, if politicians aren't responding to their electorates and aren't giving them what they demand, then that is a problem. And I think until that starts happening to a greater extent, I think you're going to be lumbered with quite an unresponsive political superstructure in your country. And that's not, I don't think that's a particularly revolutionary thing to say. It's something that I apply everywhere. We were talking yesterday, I had dinner with friends about how voters in Namibia can make their voices heard and apply pressure to their MPs or to their regional council or whatever. I don't think that's really working here in Namibia. Maybe Dr. Tula will have something to say about that. We can talk about the economy. To me, the economy is less important than the political system of the country. Until you get the politics working right, you're unlikely to get the economics working right. So that's really what I'd say to that. The erosion of trust. I think we all know why trust has eroded. I mean, I've documented a lot in my book, and I don't come down in a particularly strong way, but we just document, yes, this capital project started off costing $500 million, ended up costing 5 billion. Why was that the case? Who benefited from that? Was the tender put out properly? Was there any corruption? Or all these things, and you can go through case after case. I don't have the full facts. I don't pretend to have the full facts, but there is a definite pattern there that the public sector is seen as a feeding trough for people who know how to work the system. And that's not a good thing. We need to come down on that. I don't see much evidence that we are. There are some cases, but it's all the sorts of things that Graham at the IPPR gets involved in. And that does erode trust, because people then feel, well, he gets millions for this crooked tender, and I get nothing. I'd also say, and again, I'm not putting out my manifesto, my personal manifesto, but I have put things on the IPPR website in the past. I felt this emergency income grant, which was introduced at the beginning of COVID, just showed we could move fast and pretty effectively on something that was very important. I was very impressed by what government did then. And I think if we're going to create this sort of violent economy where a few people in the oil and gas industry and in the public sector do well, but everyone else gets nothing, and we are going to have to think about spreading the country's income and wealth around a lot more, beyond just a few people in Windhoek and Walvis Bay. And the EIG was one example of the way you could do that. I'll leave that there. NBC, yes, great questions again. Investment. Well, I only look at the statistics, so maybe the Honourable Minister has different statistics to me. But these are all official government statistics. They're not cooked up by Robin Sherborne in his back room. So I can only report what I report. I talk to a lot of people. I hear things from a lot of people. So I don't think there's any doubt that there's been a slump. We might be on the verge of a boom, all this oil and gas drilling. But I mean, whether it comes into the country properly and makes an impact, I mean, we can have a debate about that. But a lot of it is, just to drill one well costs you $100 million, and very little of that actually goes into the Namibian economy. So I'd say I'm reporting what I'm reporting, which is official statistics. The rating agencies, I think that's a good one. I mean, quite clearly, the three main rating agencies didn't cover themselves in glory in the run-up to the subprime crisis and the global financial crisis. And again, I'm all for competition. It goes back to that principle. I believe competition is generally a good thing. So the more credit rating agencies there are in the game, the better. It shouldn't be dominated by three global players. So I think that's absolutely fine. Again, it's about methodologies. It's about how they actually rate. But I mean, if you're telling me we need an African rating agency so then we can rate Angola the same as we can rate Germany, then I'm going to disagree with you on that. But I've absolutely no objection. I think it's a good thing. The more players there are in the game to understand the politics of African countries much better, quite possibly. I think that's only a good thing. And I think there is work afoot. My friend Salomon Hay is busy working on this on a sort of continental level, so very exciting. BRICS. Yes. Yeah, I'd ask, if you like attending big summits in far-off places, I'd say, yeah, join the BRICS. You get a trip out of it. I'm not sure what Namibia will get from the BRICS. I think Namibia is very well positioned as far as, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa anyway. It's got good relations with virtually everyone. This is a sort of, I suppose, geopolitical consideration, but I don't myself think BRICS has achieved an awful lot. These are very different countries with different economies, different political interests. So I'm not, I know the guy who came up with the term BRICS, he's a Brit actually. So I'm not a big fan, but I know people love going to these big conferences and standing with President Xi and President Putin and all these great guys and having their photos taken. So that's what lights your fire.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Helena. I'm an accounting student at NAST and I also represent the Corporate Association. I had a couple of questions. Can I just merge them to one? Okay, thank you. Looking at the current status quo, I believe that Namibia is rich in resources to make generate income from different types of resources like rich. So I wanted to ask, Namibia borrows money each and every day from IMF for economic growth purposes, yet it's used for operational costs. So question is it because we don't have enough money to pay this, or what's exactly the reason? And another thing, there's an initiation, a group of people that are advocating for BIG. Do you think that Namibia is economically ready and has the resources to provide money for every single person, at least $500 here in Namibia? And then, do you think Namibia is also ready, like economically ready for the AI thing? And looking at our budget that has been allocated, we know that education receives the highest percentage, in the budget, yet it's one of the things that suffers the most in our countries because enough money is not going there, or what exactly is happening to our economy.
I don't know, because they are like all of them, they are the best. So okay. The first one is, what are the biggest challenges facing the Namibian economy? What do you see as the biggest opportunities for the Namibian economy? What are the biggest misconceptions about the Namibian economy, and how do you think Namibia's economic future compares to other countries in Africa?
Good afternoon. My name is Junior Kenje, an engineering student, and judging on the statistics, I'll probably be unemployed once I graduate next year. So, my question goes to these two industries. Fishing industry and the oil industry. NAMRA released a report that we only get around roughly 10 billion from the fishing industry, which is 4.5% contribution towards our GDP. So my question to you is this: do you think we can get more from the fishing industry, and why would you think so? Question number two. The National Planning Commission on Opet Kanjode said this, and I'm quoting from what he said. He said that we need 300 million for exploring the oil offshore, which is another figure which he gave was 1.5 billion for a single well. So my question goes back to why do we need these funds? And on our current state, can we not afford it? Because they take loans every and single year. I will compare that with what the Arab countries have done, especially Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia gets around 326 billion from the oil discoveries in their country. This is a report that is from last year. That is roughly, if you have to do your calculation, that is roughly 87% contribution to their government revenue. So when the Ministry of Mines and Energy comes out in public openly with a big smile and says that we can only get as little as 10% from the oil industry, would that 10% even be as much as 10% contribution to the Namibian economy? That's a question that I also have for you. So let me just back there.
And you remember at independence, we certainly knew what we didn't know. And we brought in clever people from ODI, yourself, and we brought in some very clever people from the Commonwealth Secretariat. We used that expertise to negotiate the first oil licensing, the Namibia deal, etc. So that's the first poser. We've moved on 30 years, we've got incredibly significant discoveries. So my question really is, are we using the same level of expertise as we did then when we knew what we didn't know? When you go around the hydrogen and the oil and gas discovery, the meetings you have, are we really tapping that expertise, which is global expertise, that's appropriate to us here? Or are we leveraging the McKinsey's, the Harvard Growth Labs and all of that? And some of those reports that I've seen are very flimsy. I hope your experience is different. We have these sort of fora, and we have IPR doing great work. Unsidle is fantastic, Economic Association. But I'm not seeing government listening to the think tanks that we have here. We prefer to listen to Harvard Growth Lab or McKinsey's or whatever. And I'm just worried that this type of discussion isn't going much further than simply educating people. My second question, so the first is, are we using the right expertise? Are you finding that expertise when you go around for us to be able to negotiate with Total and Shell, etc.? The second one is, are we really seeing our development partners as real partners? And are they, clearly Hans Seidel is doing great work, KfW, GIZ, but are they really doing what's in Namibia's best interest, or are some of our partners looking at their own interests? And are there any honest brokers in our system who can say, that's all very well for you in hydrogen, for example, but the Namibian priorities should be the following? So those are the two questions.
Yes, let me start on the first question. Very good. Okay, let me say something about resources. This is, a common statement that Namibia is a land rich in resources, and there is some truth in that, but it's not as rich as we think. So, for example, in the mineral sector, I would argue we have a very special diamond resource, but our other resources are not particularly special by global standards. Uranium is generally pretty low grade. Gold, we have a little bit of gold. Zinc, we had copper. These are very small deposits and not particularly rich deposits generally by global standards. So you have to be a bit careful when you say that. I know it's almost like everyone starts off by saying this country is so rich in resources. It's not that rich, and it's very resource specific. The next issue was about borrowing. I think on why do we need to borrow when we've got all these resources, if I sort of understood it. Governments borrow because there are good things to invest in. So you borrow money, you invest it in something good, and that then grows the size of the pie, however defined, and you pay back the money that you've borrowed. It's rather like an individual buying a house or something. Borrowing is a natural and good part of the economy, provided you use that borrowing for something productive. And what I've been arguing is that we haven't been doing so, and that's a real shame. Your question on the basic income grant, I think, is a very good one. And I did mention the emergency income grant in some of my previous remarks. But I've done one of my QERs deals with the basic income grant. And I would argue at this stage, if you're talking about giving money to everyone, which is the basic sort of philosophy behind the basic income grant, I don't think that's realistic at this stage. Just do the maths, which I've done in this paper. You can download it from the IPPR. So I've got a lot of sympathy towards a BIG, especially in an economy that's as skewed as this, and where some people are doing very, very well and the rest have nothing. I think we need to look at something we can introduce more gradually over time. So not a basic income grant, but something else, I would argue. And you see, that's where I believe public sector reform is important, because at the moment we're spending all our tax revenue on keeping the public sector afloat. It's like a big sort of superstructure that sits on the economy. We haven't got money left for anything else. By freeing up resources, by closing down loss-making public enterprises, and by cutting out waste and doing all sorts of other things, that then frees up money for something much more useful, which could be something like an emergency income grant. So that's why I'm arguing for public sector reform. The 4 questions. They're all good questions. Biggest challenges, biggest opportunities, biggest misconceptions. Where does Namibia sort of rank in Africa? Let me answer 2 of them. The misconception, I think, I'll go back to the resources one. You know, we do have resources, but it's not fabulous resources we've got, and that is a misconception, especially in the mining industry. And you'll see a lot of our mining operations are not making huge profits. They go on from year to year. They have some good years, but look at the numbers, they're not immensely profitable. So I think there's that misconception. I think within Africa, I mean, I'm still optimistic after all these years that Namibia could be an absolute leader on the continent in so many ways. But to do so, it has to change its policies, attract much more foreign investment, boost local investment as well, and get governance and corruption under control. But I still think we have it in us. I'm still optimistic about that. Next question, fishing industry. Did you say 10 billion?
Yes.
Well, I'm very sceptical of that number, I have to say. 10 billion is a lot of money, and No, in terms of GDP, absolutely, you're right. But in terms of tax paid, I'd be very surprised if it paid any tax, to be honest. I mean, the fishing industry, as I do. I'd like to know where you get your numbers from. I'm sceptical. I don't know anything about fishing because they stopped publishing statistics on the fishing industry in 2009. Who the hell knows what's going on in this industry? It's certainly not me. You're asking the wrong person. But I think it would be very nice if NAMRA published a lot more tax data. I think that would be incredibly useful to analysts like myself, and it would also help us gauge what's going on in the economy to a much greater extent. So I like the thrust of your question, even if I can't agree with your numbers. I think as the oil revenues start playing, this is where I come back to EITI, it will be absolutely crucial to do 2 things. One is to make sure the Namibian people as a whole think they're getting a reasonable deal from this. They're not being shortchanged by the multinational oil companies. And there were some good presentations at the conference last week where government officials were saying, no, we get 50% of the take, 60% of the take, even as high as 68%, I think someone was mentioning. And that's because of the formula that government uses, if you like, to tax the industry. And I think there needs to be a much broader understanding of this formula and a reassurance that this actually gives Namibia a reasonable deal than there is at the moment. I think this tax regime is sort of shrouded in mystery. I need to look at it myself, to be perfectly honest. And maybe Robert's already looked at it. But we need to convince ourselves this is a good tax regime which will give rewards to investors who put a lot of billions of dollars down, but also rewards to Namibia. So we need to convince ourselves of that. I think that's very important. Because otherwise these oil companies are just going to be seen as yet another group of outsiders who come in and scam us. And that can't be allowed to happen. The Saudi Arabia, NPC, 10% I think you mentioned, okay, so this is what I understand, that the take that will go to the Namibian government is well above 50%, so it's not 10%. We will get a very good deal under the current tax regime, just as we're getting a good deal under the NAMDEB, Diamond Act tax regime out of our diamond resource. But this isn't widely known, so of course people are suspicious, and that's, I think, something that does need to be tackled. If you don't know what you're getting, then you assume the worst, I think. So the more numbers, the better. Good. Steve Galloway's question on expertise. Doing my rounds, Steve, it's a bit of a mixed bag actually. So I think there are some good people and some good expertise, national and international. I think we could do a lot more. I think we had a great example in the mining industry way back, and you'll remember this, so I think you initiated it with this American professor who gave a view on our tax regime. I think having a report like that, and making it public and sort of making sure people understand what the arguments are, I think would do an awful lot of good, even in the nascent oil and gas thing, and possibly the hydrogen industry too. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. I do come across some good people, but it's not uniformly good, I would say. We could do more. I mean, I'm under no illusion that forums like this change anything, I'm afraid to say, having given so many over the years. Yet people still encourage me to participate, and I willingly go along with it. Who listens to whom? I'm not quite sure. Development partners, well, of course, I'm also sceptical. Countries, I mean, someone very famous once said, countries don't have friends, they have interests. It's very hard to divorce a country's development aid program from politics of that country. And I think we have to handle it appropriately. That's not to say they're all out to get us either. But I don't think development partners are going to save this country from Andre's impending apocalypse. It's going to be ourselves. We have to get this right. We have to use these resources that are available in the best way possible. So that's not a great answer, possibly, but it's a sort of pragmatic answer to a complex question. Thanks.